The tension was already thick in the studio before the cameras even started rolling. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the center of the panel on The View, flipping through her cue cards with the calm of someone who believed they were about to dominate the conversation. Across from her sat Karoline Leavitt, young, confident and composed, with that same unshakable calm she carried on Capitol Hill. But this wasn't Capitol Hill. This was Whoopi's turf, or so she thought. It began innocently enough. Joy Behar threw the first question. Karoline, you're part of an administration that claims to fight for everyday Americans, but you're also pushing policies that critics say ignore the lived experiences of marginalized communities. What do you say to that? Karoline leaned forward. I'd say you're misreading the intention behind the policy. Fighting for everyday Americans means recognizing all voices, including those who feel ignored by elitist narratives that dominate shows like this. The audience stirred. Whoopi leaned in. So let me get this straight. You're saying we're the elitists? Karoline didn't flinch. I'm saying when you mock the concerns of parents, small business owners, and religious Americans, yes, that sounds pretty elitist to me. A beat of silence. Then Whoopi fired back. Well, you sure got a lot of opinions for someone who's basically reading talking points off a Trump teleprompter. Tell me, do they teach that kind of loyalty in MAGA boot camp, or is that just instinct? The crowd gasped. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Karoline turned to her unshaken. Her tone was ice cold, her delivery precise. Tell me, Whoopi, do they teach that kind of smug condescension in liberal media school, or is that just the special flavor of daytime television arrogance you've perfected over the decades? The audience, moments ago restless and chatty, fell into a razor-edged silence. Then came a few audible gasps. Cameras zoomed in. The production team knew they had something. This wasn't just banter anymore, this was political theater dressed in designer shoes. Whoopi arched an eyebrow and smirked. She leaned back, arms folded like a queen on her throne, completely unbothered. Honey, she said with a slow, almost mocking chuckle, I've been doing this since before you were born. You're charming, I'll give you that. But you're out of your league. It was a line delivered with the kind of casual disrespect only Whoopi could get away with on live TV, a dismissal wrapped in velvet. But Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She let the weight of the insult hang in the air like a storm cloud, and then, with a composed smile that somehow made the moment even more tense, she answered, That might be true in Hollywood, she said. Her voice dipped in grace and steel. But in the law, in actual governance, in understanding constitutional frameworks and how legislation is shaped, I know exactly where I stand. Whoopi blinked. And then Joy Behar, sensing the rising heat in the studio, jumped in like a lifeguard diving into turbulent waters. Okay, let's be real for a second. You're not a lawyer, Karoline. Come on. I mean, you're young, smart, sure, but you're not a lawyer. Karoline turned her head slowly. Her eyes locked on Joy with the calm intensity of someone who had been underestimated one too many times. She held up a single finger, just one, and said without missing a beat, Actually, Joy, I completed my Juris Doctor with honors. I interned under 2 leading constitutional law scholars and served as legal counsel for a bipartisan congressional investigation into regulatory overreach before I ever stepped behind a podium. Now it was Whoopi who blinked again, twice this time. Her smirk flickered. Joy's mouth opened slightly. Wait, what? She muttered, her voice trailing off into a stunned whisper not picked up by all the mics. Karoline wasn't finished. If you want to challenge me on the First Amendment, she said, locking eyes with Whoopi now, or discuss equal protection under the 14th, or even the parameters of executive authority in wartime conditions, I'd be more than happy to oblige. But don't mistake youth for ignorance or pretty speeches for lack of substance. A pause. A long, stunned pause. Then a lone clap from somewhere in the audience. And another. Then the room broke into full applause. Not thunderous, but real. Earned. The kind of applause that didn't come from fans, but from people who just saw a match they weren't expecting and couldn't take their eyes off of. Whoopi looked away first. Karoline didn't gloat. She just folded her hands on the table and smiled faintly, like someone who didn't need to win, because she'd already proven her point. Karoline turned slowly back to Whoopi, her expression cool and sharpened by something deeper than just rebuttal, something surgical. Her voice, when it came, was calm, but it sliced through the noise like a scalpel. "You assumed I was just a mouthpiece, a talking head programmed and polished, parroting lines from men in suits." She let the accusation linger just long enough. "But here's the truth," she continued, not raising her voice, only intensifying the pressure. "I've written the arguments you now criticize. While you were cracking jokes about DC dysfunction in front of a studio audience, I was in the library at 2 a.m. drafting legal memos on precedent. I was studying Marbury versus Madison while your producers were booking guests for hot topics. You performed courtroom drama. I lived it." The crowd murmured. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was intellectual combat. A few heads turned, eyes widening. This wasn't the predictable conservative punditry they'd expected. Karoline wasn't just clapping back, she was dismantling the platform beneath her opponents, one clause at a time. Whoopi's smirk began to tighten. Her posture stiffened ever so slightly, and she leaned in, locking eyes with Karoline as if preparing to throw down a final card. "Then maybe you can explain," Whoopi said, her voice louder now, firmer, almost triumphant, "how you justify supporting a president who's been indicted more times than he's taken the oath of office. You call that constitutional loyalty." The crowd gave a mixed reaction. Some cheers, some gasps, some waiting to see how Karoline would handle it. But she didn't flinch, not even a blink. "Innocent until proven guilty," Karoline replied evenly. "That's not just a phrase, it's the cornerstone of American law. Due process, rule of law, equal protection under the 5th and 14th Amendments. I don't support people. I support the Constitution, whether it's popular or not. And if you only believe in those protections when your side benefits, then you don't believe in justice. You believe in vengeance." Boom. That was the word that silenced half the room. Whoopi wasn't done, though. She rolled her eyes, shook her head, and snapped, "Spare me the law school monologue. This isn't a courtroom, Karoline. It's the View, not SCOTUS." Karoline smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. She leaned forward slowly, voice low, but every word rang like a gavel strike. "Maybe it should be." Gasps rippled through the audience. "Because if we actually debated facts instead of feelings," she said, her eyes locked with Whoopi's, "you'd realize something uncomfortable. You've built your entire argument on outrage, not evidence. Performance, not principle." The studio lights seemed hotter now. Karoline continued, "You accuse, you point, you demand confessions, not conversations, and you expect applause for it. But if the standard is facts, I came prepared. Did you?" Whoopi's mouth opened, but no words came out immediately. Joy Behar shifted in her chair. Sunny stared down at her notes. The crowd, silent, hanging on the edge. And somewhere in the control room, a producer was mouthing to the director, "Keep rolling, don't you dare cut to commercial." The audience fell into a heavy silence, one of those thick, waiting silences that happens when the script breaks and reality slips in. You could hear someone cough. A chair creaked somewhere in the back, but no one dared speak. A producer behind the camera frantically waved a red card meant to signal "wrap for commercial," but the hosts didn't even blink. The tension had eclipsed the format. Then Whoopi stood up, not all the way, just enough to command presence. Her palms planted on the desk, eyebrows arched. Her voice was sharper now, almost cracking under the pressure to reclaim the high ground. "You come on this show and you act like you know more than people who've lived this fight for decades. You're 27. You've barely lived at all." There were a few quiet mm-hms from the audience. Whoopi was leaning into authority, into legacy, into years of built-up credibility as both actress and activist, but Karoline didn't budge. She rose from her seat too, calm, centered, her voice controlled but firm. "Age isn't a disqualifier," she said, looking Whoopi directly in the eye. "Bad arguments are. And when someone attacks your age instead of your point, it usually means they've already lost." You could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker in Whoopi's eyes, part challenge, part disbelief, part something else. Karoline stepped forward, not in aggression but with a sense of measured purpose, her tone rising only slightly. "I came here expecting a tough conversation. I didn't expect a coronation of assumptions. I didn't expect personal attacks. I didn't expect to be insulted for my age or dismissed as a puppet, and I especially didn't expect it from someone who claims to fight for women's voices. At that, the energy shifted. It was no longer just a heated exchange, it was a call-out, a direct challenge to the very idea of who gets to speak with authority in modern America. Joy Behar shifted awkwardly in her seat. Sunny Hostin pursed her lips. Even Alyssa Farah Griffin, usually the diplomatic one, tilted her head, unsure whether to jump in or sit back and watch history unfold. But Karoline wasn't finished. I came here with facts, with court rulings, with case law. You came at me with snark and assumptions, so let's be clear. If we're playing Identity Olympics, you win. But if we're debating substance, I'm not here to play. Before we go further, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next takedown like this one, because it only gets wilder from here. Karoline adjusted her blazer and turned to the audience, not for applause but to level with them directly. See, this is the part they don't show you. They want you to believe that if you're young, if you're conservative, if you're not part of the Hollywood-approved club, you have no business speaking. But I didn't come to be approved. I came to be heard. A woman in the second row actually nodded. Then Whoopi finally responded, but not with fury, with something more calculated. You're clever, she said, slowly easing back into her seat. But clever doesn't mean wise. You quote law books and tweet like a warrior, but that doesn't mean you understand the soul of what we fight for. Karoline didn't miss a beat. I do, she replied softly. That's why I fight for the Constitution, not for applause, not for clout, but for the principle that voices like mine, even the inconvenient ones, deserve to be at the table too. And then finally, the director had to cut to commercial. But by the time the cameras faded to black, the hashtags were already trending. Whoopi inhaled, lips parting to fire back, but Karoline beat her to it. She raised her hand. I'm not done. The room froze. Even the audience, unsure whether to clap or recoil, sat motionless. The authority in her voice didn't come from volume. It came from certainty. She wasn't asking for permission. She was taking the floor. Then she pivoted, not back to Whoopi, but to the studio audience, to America, to every viewer watching at home, waiting to see what the youngest person on the stage would say next. You deserve better than this kind of theater, Karoline said, her voice calm, deliberate, unwavering. We're on national television, in the middle of a country that's struggling to pay rent, where schools are failing, and where violent crime is rising, and we're using this airtime to watch a celebrity interrupt, belittle, and try to silence someone who happens to disagree with her worldview. The audience leaned in. Even the camera operators seemed to stop breathing. We should be talking about real things, she continued. School choice, parental rights, the economy, rising grocery bills, safety in our cities, but instead, we're watching someone with an Oscar try to act like credentials and applause make them morally superior. Then came the dagger. Karoline turned her head slowly, almost dramatically, back to Whoopi. You're not the voice of every woman. You're just the loudest voice in this room. The camera cut to Whoopi, silent. Not even a twitch of defiance left. Her smirk was gone. Her hands clenched slightly on the desk. She looked stunned. And that silence, it said everything, not just about the moment, but about the shift. In that instant, Karoline wasn't just a guest on The View, she had seized it, reframed it, exposed it, and America knew it. The commercial break finally hit, but it didn't matter, because the internet had already exploded. Within minutes, the hashtags, Whoopi vs. Karoline, Legal Genius, Gen Z clapback, Conservative Lioness. She ended her. All trending, all climbing. Clips of Karoline's monologue were everywhere. YouTube Shorts, TikTok, X, Truth Social. Conservative influencers were calling it a masterclass in poise under fire. Even some moderate pundits admitted she took control without ever raising her voice. And the memes. One had Karoline pointing at Whoopi with the caption, "You're not the voice, just the volume." Another showed a courtroom background behind Karoline with the words, "Objection, career overruled." One popular tweet simply read, "A Karoline Leavitt didn't just show up on The View, she flipped the table without touching it." Even liberal circles were split. Some criticized Whoopi for letting it get personal. Others admitted Karoline had weaponized intelligence with elegance. But the result was clear. A generational shift had aired live on daytime TV, and millions had seen it. Fox News aired the segment in full. Tucker Carlson replayed the moment with a smirk. Whoopi met her match and she didn't come prepared. Even liberal outlets were stunned. One commentator on MSNBC admitted, "I disagree with Karoline Leavitt on most issues, but she handled that table like a trial lawyer." And Whoopi? She never addressed it directly. But her team quietly pulled her next 2 appearances. Karoline, on the other hand, was invited onto 6 primetime shows in 48 hours. She didn't ask for that moment. But she owned it. Because when Whoopi Goldberg tried to belittle her with a cheap insult, she didn't just respond. She prosecuted. And she won. The ripple effects began immediately. Twitter turned into a war zone. Clips of the moment were repackaged and reposted by influencers across the spectrum. Conservative commentators called it the day Gen Z fired back. TikTok creators layered the audio over courtroom dramas and dubbed Karoline the legal lion. Instagram reels flashed quotes from her like, "Age isn't a disqualifier, bad arguments are," overlaid with cinematic music and digital confetti. Even college debate teams started using the clip as a teaching tool. One Yale coach tweeted, "This is how you control a room with logic, restraint, and facts." On Reddit, entire threads were dedicated to dissecting her responses line by line. One legal student posted, "I paused and rewound her rebuttal 3 times. The structure of her defense is textbook appellate advocacy." Within 12 hours, the full video had surpassed 10 million views across platforms. Hashtags like Karoline clapback, Whoopi got served, and Legal Genius trended simultaneously on Twitter, Instagram, and even YouTube Shorts. The moment became meme fuel, GIF gold, and digital folklore. But what set it apart was the absence of cruelty. Karoline never raised her voice. She didn't gloat. She didn't mock. She just stood her ground, firmly, sharply, unapologetically. And that ironically made the hit even harder. Whoopi's defenders scrambled. A few journalists tried spinning the moment as a generational misunderstanding. Others blamed the show's producers for letting it go off the rails. But the truth was undeniable. Karoline had entered the lion's den and walked out with the crown. Within days, she was featured in op-eds, interviews, and trending discussion panels. Her LinkedIn profile was flooded with praise. A conservative PAC posted a video titled "Karoline versus The View, the Day Reason Won" that racked up 2 million views before breakfast. Politicians took note too. Senators posted shout-outs. Congressional staffers quoted her lines in Slack threads. Even a few moderate Democrats sent quiet nods of respect. Karoline Leavitt became more than just a name. She became a symbol of youth meeting experience and winning with class. And Whoopi? The silence grew heavier. The views ratings dropped the following week. Audiences questioned whether the format, which once thrived on generational perspective, had become a tired echo chamber. Behind closed doors, producers argued over whether the show had gone too far. Rumors swirled about guest vetting changes and emergency PR meetings. Insiders leaked that even longtime co-hosts were frustrated with the fallout. Meanwhile, Karoline didn't slow down. She gave a speech at a Georgetown panel titled "Facts versus Feelings, the Next Generation of Civil Debate." She was calm, poised, but now unmistakably confident. That moment on The View wasn't a clash of personalities, she said. It was a collision between emotional rhetoric and intellectual rigor. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Backstage, a student journalist asked her, "Did you expect that moment to go viral?" She paused. "I expected to speak truthfully. Everything else, just noise." In the months that followed, Karoline's voice echoed beyond cable news. She launched a podcast, published articles in national outlets, mentored young women entering politics and law. A best-selling author called her moment the intellectual awakening Gen Z needed. And the most iconic image? A still from that fateful show. Karoline leaning forward, finger slightly raised, expression calm but unflinching, across from Whoopi, caught mid-silence. That image now hangs framed in college dorm rooms, debate halls, and one reportedly in a senator's private office. It wasn't just a TV moment. It was a cultural reset. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.